A young boy once went to the circus and was astonished when he saw a giant elephant tethered to the ground by a thin rope. Curious, he went over to the elephant trainer and asked, "How are you holding down such a huge elephant with such a tiny rope? The rope doesn't look very strong. This elephant looks like it can break down a large brick wall, let alone break free of this tiny little rope. So what's going on here?" The trainer smiled at him and explained, "When this elephant was just a baby, weighing just 250 pounds, we tied it to the same rope. And every day he tried to break free, but he couldn't manage to do it. He tried and tried, but to no avail. And after a few months, he finally gave up, convinced that it was simply impossible to escape. And now he weighs over 2,000 pounds and is strong enough to easily break free of these ropes. However, in his mind, he's still chained by an unbreakable rope, so he doesn't even try to escape." And this relates to such a deep theme in this week's Parsha, Parshas Vayera, where Avraham famously says, "Anochi afar va'efer," which literally means, "I am but dust and ashes." Now, this is generally understood as a statement of extreme humility, but there's an even deeper layer here that we have to develop. But in order to understand the deeper intimations of this important statement, we have to return to last week's Parsha, Parshas Lech Lecha, in which Avraham has a perplexing encounter with Hashem. Hashem promises Avraham that he will become the father of an immeasurably populous nation, to which Avraham seems to voice his doubts. He challenges Hashem, claiming that not only is he currently childless, the stars, the mazalos, say that Avraham will never have a child. How then, Avraham asks Hashem, can you promise that I will be the father of a great nation? It doesn't seem to make sense. So Hashem responds by taking Avraham hachutza, outside. And Rashi explains this to mean that Hashem took Avraham above the stars. Now this entire episode is peculiar because Avraham argues with Hashem, using what he saw in the stars as his evidence. So what does it mean that Avraham saw in the stars that he wasn't destined to have a child? And how can Avraham argue with Hashem about what's going to happen? Hashem tells Avraham he's going to have a child. How can Avraham even think of suggesting otherwise? And finally, what does it mean that Hashem took Avraham above the stars? So let's start by understanding the mazalos. Chazal explain that the world has a natural course, referred to as mazel, which literally is translated as a divine flow. So just as a scientist can study an apple seed and see the exact apple tree that will eventually grow from it, astrologists can study the stars and see which events Hashem has designed to come to pass in the world. So therefore, Avraham had a valid question. On the one hand, Hashem had promised him a child. But on the other hand, Hashem created the mazalos, which are telling Avraham the exact opposite, that he will not have a child. So what's going on? So in response to Avram's question, Hashem takes him above the stars. And that same Gemara in Shabbos explains that Hashem was teaching Avraham a very deep principle, Ein Mazel LeYisrael. The Jews are not bound by the mazalos. The Jews are not bound by nature. The stars may say one thing, but the stars themselves are controlled by Hashem. When you're connected to the source of reality itself, Hashem, you can transcend the stars. You can overcome mazel. You can transcend your nature. So as long as Avraham lived within the limits of nature, he wasn't able to have any children. But once he transcended the natural, anything was possible. But one question remains. If the events in this world emanate from the mazalos, then how can we reconcile the fact that they foretold that Avraham would not have children? Chazal don't claim that the mazel changed. They only say that Avraham transcended it. How did this work? So the answer is profound. At this point, Avraham's name was still Avram, without a hey. The mazalos told the truth. Avram would not have a child. But once Avram realized that he wasn't bound by nature, he transcended his current state and transformed himself. Two chapters later, Avram's name was changed to Avraham. Avram wasn't destined to have a child, but Avraham was. And Rashi explains that as soon as Avram became Avraham, he was able to have Yitzchak. And in Jewish thought, a name, a shem, reflects essence. The Hebrew word for name, shem, shares the same root as the word for soul, neshama, because a person's name reflects their very essence. So changing your name reflects a much deeper change, a change at the very root level of the self. So in other words, Avraham's change in name resulted in a complete metamorphosis. It was his way of transcending his mazel and living on a plane above nature. And we can now understand Avraham's famous statement of Anochi Afar Ve'efer on an even deeper level. Ashes represent an elemental breakdown, the most basic particles of an object. Dirt is the starting point of growth. It's the place where seeds are planted and given life. In a deeper sense, Avraham was saying that every day he would ash himself, breaking his very self down into its elemental root form, and he would then plant himself anew. In other words, Avraham would recreate himself every single day. And the most amazing part of this famous statement is its placement. When does Avraham say this phrase? Right after his name is changed from Avram to Avraham. Only once Avraham realized that his potential is limitless, that he can transcend his mazel, did he also realize that he could endlessly develop himself further, ashing and planting himself anew every single day. So we can now return to our opening story. What happens when the elephant discovers that the rope is not strong enough to hold him down? Well, a fire once broke out in the circus, and during the ensuing chaos, the circus tent fell down. And after the dust settled, the trainers began searching for the elephant. But to their amazement, they couldn't find the elephant anywhere. And finally, after a few hours, they found him wandering in the nearby forest. Because during the fire, the elephant had been overcome with fear and adrenaline, and in that panic, he easily broke free from his ropes. So when they brought him back and tied him down again, the elephant escaped just moments later. And they tried again, but the elephant broke loose once more. It was clear that once the elephant realized that the ropes couldn't hold him, he wouldn't be held back by these chains any longer. While at one point he thought these ropes controlled him, he now realized that the only thing holding him back was himself. The trainers had no choice. They had to get a new elephant for the circus. Does this idea ring true for you? How often do we create mental cages of our own? How often do we allow other people's opinions of us to become our reality? We allow people to tell us what we can or cannot do. And sometimes it's a friend or a loved one. But worst of all, it's usually our own inner voice that is the cause of our self-doubt. We convince ourselves that we can't, we're not smart enough, good-looking enough, or funny enough. We're too old or too young, too short or too tall. But here's the key. We are the only ones who hold the key to our mental cages because we created the lock. Opening the lock is simple. It requires only that we make a new decision, that we change our identity, that we believe it's possible. History is being read, but it's also being written today by people with courage and imagination. In other words, your acts of greatness will forever be engraved into history. History is not only a past event being read, the present moment as well is forever being transformed into a part of human history, and we need to imagine a greater future, a greater version of ourselves. We need to close our eyes and picture an ideal future, and then open our eyes and make that our reality. Because this is the actualization of Ein Mazel Yisrael. There truly are no limits. When we're in touch with our best and highest selves and connected to Hashem, the source of all self, anything is possible. So let's be inspired to follow in Avram's footsteps and journey beyond the stars. Because there's a famous saying, let's shoot for the moon. For even if we miss, we'll land amongst the stars. I say, let's land above the stars.